Welcome everybody to our final Humanities Research Colloquium. This has been a really dynamic and exciting series this week. We're so thankful to all of the graduates and fellows. I'm Professor Jesse Mills in the Ethnic Studies Department and the outgoing chair of collaborative research with the Humanities Center. I'm very excited to join my colleagues, Dr. Foucan and Lindy Villa, to present this presentation of our amazing humanities researchers' work. So I'd also like to acknowledge that USD is on the ancestral homeland, the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation, and encourage everybody to learn more about Kumeyaay history and the Kumeyaay sovereignty struggle that is ongoing. And it includes connections with Kumeyaay communities in Northern Baja California, as well as very direct conversations and power struggles around the use of land, including the US-Mexico border wall, and other ways that Kumeyaay language and cultural preservation project the long-term viability and sustainability of their sovereignty and their community and all of our well-being. So I just wanted to start with that acknowledgement and thank everyone for being here. I'd like to turn it over to Atre. Is it going to you now?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Atre Foucan, Director of the Interdisciplinary Humanities Program. Before I just sort of say a few things about this event and housekeeping matters, I hope you can all join me in thanking Professor Mills for being the first faculty member to lead the Keck Fellows Program. You've been wonderful, so if you can all kind of thank him very much for his outstanding work to get this going for USD. It's been wonderful to work with you these past few years, and have a great time on your sabbatical next year. Also want to take this time to thank Lindy Villa. Without the Humanities Center coordinator, actually nothing is possible without her. And only the people working on these events can know that. So thank you so much, Lindy. Yes, you are incredibly just amazing. Thank you. So welcome to the student presenters, to friends, to faculty members who've come to support student research. We usually have, not only is it in person usually, but we usually have the students of the Keck Fellowship Program and the Interdisciplinary Humanities Program to present together. It's a way for students to share each other's research beyond the ways in which capstones are usually organized at USD. Students just presenting to their own students in the departments. So we hope more of this can happen at USD, where departments share capstone research. These two groups of students have been working for an entire year. Which is very unusual at USD. And as I always say, something I did not do until my late 20s in graduate school. So I'm extremely honored to be a part of this group, and always in awe of what they teach me. I also want to thank Professor Farah Karpetian for being the faculty facilitator for today. Thank you so much for coming. And we will actually have the students present one after the other. Please feel free to have put your questions into the chat box, but we will reserve questions and feedback until the end, after all the students present. And we'll begin after the presentations with students asking questions of each other for a brief moment, so they can also speak to each other.
Thank you very much. First off, I just want to say good morning and thank you for coming today. My name is Noah Stroosma. I'm an Interdisciplinary Humanities major with a focus in philosophy and a minor in psychology. The project I'm doing for my senior thesis is a symposium on happiness. A symposium is a drinking party where everyone gives a speech on a philosophical topic. So my philosophical topic is happiness and how to be happy throughout your entire life. So the way that I've set this up is as a creative piece. I have 7 individual speakers coming from different perspectives on how to be happy. I have them set as 7 high schoolers that were all good friends in high school and then graduated and then had no contact with each other for 10 years and then met back up at their 10-year high school reunion. Now, it opens with them all reconnecting, meeting each other, talking about what they're up to. And then when the final speaker arrives, he poses the question, I haven't been super happy after graduation. My life's not going super great. I'm trying to figure out how to be happy throughout my entire life. What have you guys been up to? And so each speaker then delivers a speech on what they've been doing and what they think the key to being happy throughout their lives is. Now, this is based on Plato's Symposium about love. It's similarly set up where Socrates shows up late and they're all waiting for him, and he gets there and he's like, oh, I was pondering, what love is. And that is what waylaid me on my journey to this party. So from there, I have my 7 speakers. So I have a mechanic named Tommy, and his perspective, he's the first to speak. His perspective is purpose. That purpose is the key to happiness. That he finds satisfaction in completing tasks, being useful, and having purpose. That fills the void inside him, that makes him happy. Next, I have Jane. She's a nature photographer. She comes from a very strict household, and she believes that the key to happiness is freedom and being able to wake up every day and to do whatever you want, to be able to travel the world, to be in nature. So that's her perspective. And then I have like an influencer, a celebrity, if you will, but just an influencer, someone with a lot of followers on social media. And she believes that the key to happiness is being seen, being famous. It's kind of vain, but I think that'll contrast really well with the first 2 speeches. And then I have John. He's a farmer, and he believes the key to happiness is simplicity, living a simple life. He works directly with the land. He raises crops. He feeds the world. It's something noble. It's something good. And that's what he believes the key to happiness is. And then I have Austin. He's an investment banker. He believes that the key to happiness is power and money. And so he is tenacious. He wants to succeed in life. And so basically success. He wants to be successful. And he thinks that that will fulfill him, make him happy. Then I have a character, an 8th character actually, that I want to add in right here. This is just to add in more to the real life situation within my symposium. I want to have someone that kind of barges into the conversation. If you've read the Love Symposium, in Plato's Love Symposium, this is Alcibiades. He comes in, he gives a speech on what he thinks love is, but he's really using that speech in order to seduce Socrates. And so my character that will be doing this will be doing something similar, saying the key to happiness is pleasure or something like that. I think that'll just make it more fun to read. And then after that speech, I have Zoe. She believes that living in the moment is the key to happiness. So every summer she works as a surf instructor, and every winter she goes and she works as a ski instructor. So she gets to do what she loves. She gets to spend time outside, but really what she's doing, she doesn't have like a goal in mind, a plan. She's just living in the moment. And then my last speaker, who represents my point of view, is James. James is an artist, and James believes that the key to happiness is self-love. And through loving yourself, no matter what situation you are in, what circumstances you're in, you will find happiness, because once you love yourself, then you can find yourself to be happy in any given situation. And then I will just conclude with each of the speakers kind of contemplating their own lives and their own perspectives, and the other speakers. And then I will end it with kind of a question to the reader, like, what do you think the key to happiness is? Thank you for listening. And that is my senior thesis project.
So my name is Luke Lightiger, senior capstone interdisciplinary humanities thesis. The title of my paper is Making Love, a Borderless Experience of Joy and Exuberance. And I wish that it were as simple as that song, but I find that there's so much more depth to it than drinking too much wine and feeling the amore. Next slide. So my name is Luke Lightiger. Like I said, I'm interdisciplinary humanities major. I have an emphasis, or I'm getting my emphasis in religion and theology studies. And my second major is psychology. I want to take a moment to celebrate my brother, John. He passed away 2 months ago, but he has actually he's kind of the reason I started my journey on looking into love. He, right before college, he was a drug addict, and I was at a rehab with him, and I grew up not really feeling a lot of love for him. And at that point in the rehab, I said to him, John, I've felt so much hate in my life towards you, and I'm going to choose to love you instead. And from that point on, I got into a few relationships. I kind of started this whole new journey on what it is to love in different capacities, for family, for people you don't like, for friends, and for partnership. So I just wanted to take a moment to celebrate him. And I think this is a great photo that kind of represents a type of love that is just fun and joy. So as most people have kind of heard, there are a lot of types of love, not as many as this photo shows often, but you normally just eros, storge on the top, and then agape. And you'll kind of see that how this to the right is something that I found in a psychological paper, just kind of how they take these Greek definitions of love and apply it to modern day relationships. So I'm looking a little bit at that. I just want to show that. And then in religion and Christianity, you'll hear love your neighbor as yourself. And that is really a big part in all the papers that I'm looking at, or all the readings that I've been reading. And this photo on the bottom right, I really appreciate because it shows this planting a seed. I think that is a great metaphor for love as well, which is to grow it tenderly and give it its space, give it its sun, and care for it in its times of need. So I was looking at a huge number of books, as people do when we research, as we all do. Some at gurus from India who have kind of come from Hindu backgrounds or are currently studying yoga. Also a developmental approach to treating couples from the ways we love. Also looking at what we talk about when we talk about love, which is its own kind of, how do I describe it? This beautiful, almost poetry, but more like stories of different types of love throughout the world. And then The Alchemist, Mastery of Love, kind of more spiritual based looks at what it is to love in our life. Okay. What I wanted to focus on today was The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And he's like one of the third best-selling poets in the United States, I believe. And he was a Muslim, I believe, or Islamic poet who kind of looked at Arabic writings and was his own kind of spiritual person. And I don't know, there's just so much to explain. But on love, it's the first chapter in his book, and right after that it goes into marriage. And I think that this kind of just gives a little preview onto what I've been researching. And I'll read out just kind of two passages that I really appreciate from it, and then kind of add my own perspective. So the one on the slide that you see is the last like kind of paragraph of the On Love chapter. And it's, love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. Typo there. But if you love and must needs have desires, let this be your desires: to melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night, to know the pain of too much tenderness, to be wounded by your own understanding of love, and to bleed willingly and joyfully, to wake at dawn with a winged heart and give thanks for another day of loving, to rest at the noon hour and meditate love's ecstasy, to return home and eventide with gratitude, and then to sleep the prayer for the beloved in your heart and the songs and praise in your lips. Excuse me. I think that from what I've read and understood, that this type of love asks us to kind of give up a part of ourselves and to surrender. I think that that's kind of the basis of what it is to be a full-fledged human being in some ways, is to allow yourself to experience the pains and joys of love. I think that so closely this can interact with, just like Noah's presentation, with joy. I mean, you feel joy when you're in love, and maybe the other way around. You don't feel love unless you're in joy. That's kind of just the world I'm exploring right now. I'd like to read another passage, which I think delves deeper into what we all experience, which is kind of just the relationships we go through in our lives. This one is on marriage, and I'm just going to read a small part from it. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another your bread, but eat not of the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone. I think what we often find ourselves doing in our life is maybe attaching to the person we love so much, and finding that the joys and the love we get is only from the other person. Or, you know, if I can't be loved by my parents, then I don't deserve to love. If I am not in love with another person, then love will not pour out from my well, which I believe is not the case after my research. I believe that love is something where you have to be alone in order to love. You have to love yourself in order to love. But it's not as much you are yourself. It's more feeling the state of love wash over you and allowing it to be something that you can share with everybody. To finish off, there's two quotes that I got from a priest here at USD, Father Mike White. And there are two quotes that I have really appreciated and have helped me on my journey. And it's, slipped my mind just now. But I think the nerves got to me. Allow me to look it up. That's okay. Okay, it's that love should never suffocate or bind you, but it should be liberating. That's the first one. And I think that's something really special, because often we find ourselves feeling suffocated. But to remind ourselves that we need to be liberated in every act of love that we do. And the second one is, and the most important to me, is love the most in the best way that you can. And I found this significant when I came out as gay to Father Mike, and he said, okay, that's fine, but love the most in the best way that you can. If that's with a man, with a woman, with by yourself, or marrying the whole world, if that's what you need. I think there's something really beautiful to be said about loving the most in the best way that you can is an act of radicalism. And it's a choice that you make. And it's important to find that you can do that in your life in any scenario that you're in. And if that's in a relationship, have it be a flowing, loving, just feast and dance. That's my whole presentation. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Hi, everyone. My name's Alyssa Mcgovero. I'm an interdisciplinary major and sociology major. I've never really presented formally what I've been researching, but I've been researching this formally for about 3 years, but informally for probably about my whole life. And what I researched through the Keck Humanities Fellowship is education, the whole why we get educated, specifically that, why we get educated for the first place. And I'm going to be very technical in the beginning because I think I'm for a framework type of a thing. So I used Raymond Williams' idea of permanent education, where where the pedagogies and the practice, or the way in which we educate and the practice of those ways, they move beyond the classroom, in the sense of, you have kindergartners folding their hands or raising their hands to be called upon. We see that power dynamic. The teacher's the authority, while the student could be the object. In some senses, it could be in some forms of or some systems of education, they could be the subject or they can be the object. In Waldorf education or Montessori, the student's the subject. But in Paulo Freire's understanding, the teacher, through his understanding of the banking system education, the teacher is the subject while the student is the object. And so it's, there's this power dynamic in that. But from this idea of permanent education, the way in which we get around in the world, and the way in which we understand the world, and the way in which we understand who we are and how we're becoming, is really formed, in my understanding or in my research, from this interaction of being an educational facility for 5 days a week for around 40 to 50 hours, even more sometimes if you're taking extracurriculars, or you're in music. Well, that's extracurricular, but anyways, and from that idea, I attached those understandings, and other people have attached those understandings to this idea of neoliberal capitalism. And it's almost like that's the culprit of almost all the problems in the world, is this understanding of making money or not making enough money, or people having too much power, or too much money, so they have too much power. And so they hegemonically, that's I told myself I was not gonna go to these words like hegemony, because I told my sister about it the other day, and she said, I don't know what you're talking about. So, and anyways, these ideas of mass control. So, what we do and how we do it. And anyways, these market-driven ideologies, or these ideas of, worrying about what our career is going to be, so we can at least, pay the bills, or we can at least eat something, or we can at least do the things we enjoy, is what makes, I'm so sorry, someone's wanting to do handiwork. But in any case, where was I? These market-driven ideologies to pay for something is what really almost becomes what's important to us. For me, I grew up in poverty, and there was a lot of, domestic violence and child abuse, and we never had enough money. And in those understandings, money became most important to me, and the understanding that I had to go to school to get a career to make money. And that was my framework for the first 15 years of my life. And in the last my years of 16 to 20, I realized when I got, it was once told to me, when I got out of my torture chamber, I realized the prison that I was in. And the prison that I was in looked like a school. It looked like a school telling me how to be, or telling me that my grades were more important than me trying to mentally situate myself in the world. And then from that understanding, I've titled my research Many Mouths, Education as Socialization. And within this understanding, the idea of many mouths comes from, because of the things I went through when I was a child, I didn't speak till like the age of 7 or 8. And my sister would be my translator for me. So I would speak gibberish almost, and she would be like, you want a cookie? She wants a cookie type of a thing. And I would not make any sense at all, but I would always point to her mouth in any sense. And now I'm pointing to different authors' mouths, like Paulo Freire, Henry Giroux, even Ursula Le Guin, or James Baldwin, to name a few. I forgot Du Bois. I am pointing to his mouth as well, to say something like, we've built this world on profit being more important than human need, on profit being more important than actually using these profits that we accumulate ourselves to somehow figure out how to feed other people, or to somehow figure out how to have a roof over, have a, homelessness, or to figure out how to just help each other in the world. And so in this understanding, we've almost built a world against ourselves. We built an education against ourselves too, and the understandings that, I was, especially at the end of the semester, we hear, I'm having a panic attack, I'm crying, there's so much stress, I'm facing it, everyone's facing it. Why in the world would why would we make an institution where we know these things are going to happen and we don't do anything about it? It's almost like we just let it happen to us. And especially coming from the past that I had, I was tired of having things happen to me. So that tiredness came from this understanding of trying to build a world, or trying to build an alternate education system, or an alternate way of being that is for us. That is James Baldwin has this understanding, which Dr. Floyd turned me to a while ago, this understanding in his work, Evidence of Things Not Seen. How do we build a world where we are constantly have a constant connection and responsibility for each other? And I don't see that happening through this understanding of education nominally of, primary, second, or elementary, high school, and higher education. And I don't see that when you go out into the workplace, because that's still the same system of a power dynamic. You have a boss, instead of having a teacher you have to talk to, you have a boss that you have to refer to, and things like that. So to end this type of topic that I researched in, I came up with a couple things that I kept hitting my head against. I came up with the idea that I'm not going to continue, this research that I went to, or the research or understanding my life, is not going to have these simple answers. They're not going to say, we just love everyone and that's the answer. You know what I mean? Because people need to have the willingness. They need to have the responsibility to love one another. For example, I had a conversation with another one of my professors yesterday, and I asked the terribly hard questions that I do of saying, how do we create a world where we love one another, in the sense of, because people are just not willing to love one another. He said something like this, and this one, it was strange. He's like, does McDonald's sell salads? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And he was saying in the sense of this: we can choose to, or this conversation went on for a while, but we could, my reflections from this were this, and from this whole research that I did was this: we can choose to have other options in our lives that are going to be hard. And what I mean by this, and I hope I'm still making sense, because now I'm thinking fragments. We could choose, I'm going to rephrase this. All around us is the media, McDonald's, things that are fast and quick. Education is fast and quick. We have a semester of only 15 weeks for us to learn something really fast. And then we're tested on it. But that fits with the banking model of education as well, from Paulo Freire's work. But anyways, we have all these things that are fast and quick. And so the McDonald's at salad, which McDonald's doesn't have salads, it has hamburgers. And even if we have a salad equals as much as a hamburger, but anyways, I'm getting off topic. But in any case, we could choose to have things fast and quick, or we can choose the harder way of actually saying, and actually being responsible for one another, to say to your friend or your sister or your lover or your grandmother or someone like that, you could say something like, hey, we need to get a salad instead of eating a hamburger. And or instead of eating McDonald's. And so to say all of this, I think my research didn't suggest anything other than that finding in itself, to have the responsibility to say, hey, we need to think about something else. Instead of saying, you know, I formed another education system and here it is, because I don't think I can form anything right now without any understandings or any notions of capitalism built within it. And so that's going to take a little more time for me to think. But that's where we refer to Ursula Le Guin's work of the dispossessed. And I think I love her title because it's an ambiguous utopia. And so, and that understanding maybe that anti-capitalist world she created wasn't that anti-capitalist. And so that's where I am for right now. I know I rambled a bit, but I want to thank Dr. Foucan and Dr. Floyd for the time they heard me ramble. And thank you for all these years, but thank you so much.
So my name's Sienna Todd, and my project, Transformative Empathy, the Power of Art Activism, is kind of a combination of research into the intersection of art and politics through art activism, as well as my own creative works project, where I explore the idea of art activism and empathy within my own series of paintings. And so this kind of draws on the idea that art is fundamentally about seeing the world in a different way. So this comes from the viewer who places their experiences into their interpretation of the piece, from the artist who sort of taps into their own unique perspective to share it with others. Art facilitates this empathetic interaction between an individual or a community and a piece of art. It can communicate a message, frame an issue, or make a political argument more compelling. And so this visual language bridges verbal barriers to create a form of communication that's more accessible. And so this creates this ability to evoke empathy and present an idea in a unique way that is the foundation for the idea of art activism. And so to kind of contextualize what I was thinking about in relation to this idea of empathy within politics and art, I kind of draw on the work of intersectional feminist theorists Patricia Hill Collins and Bell Hooks. Collins and Hooks provide this clear starting point for how integrating empathy within political science is critical for understanding intersectional identities and engaging in feminist action. And so Patricia Hill Collins talks about the importance of empathy within knowledge building, specifically within Black feminist thought and within the creation of knowledge within political contexts in general. And so the importance of oral traditions experience as a valid form of knowledge becomes an essential part of this. And these ideas of oral traditions and dialogue and personal experience are also something that art activists draw heavily on within their work as sort of this building of knowledge within an art context. And so this also talks about this ethic of caring as a fundamental part of this knowledge building. And Bell Hooks also talks about empathy as really important to sort of integrate an intersectional perspective and create this basis for solidarity and coalition. And so then I decided to conduct this series of case studies into how art activism can have these diverse forms of expression as a political and artistic medium. And so this sort of took me to looking at feminist movements specifically that engage in art activism, or feminist works specifically that engage in art activism, that connect really deeply to this idea of empathy. And so I looked at the way art activism sort of takes place within protest movements, organizations, and artists. And so I'll draw your attention to just a couple examples to sort of contextualize what this process looks like. So this first one, Vivas Nos Queremos and Ni Una Menos, they're two movements that are addressing the issue of femicide, the killing of women because they're women. And so these movements, Vivas Nos Queremos is a graphic arts campaign that started in Mexico City to address this issue. This print in particular is from a collective called Mujeres Grabando Resistencia, which is Women Engraving Resistance. And so these movements directly engage with political empathy through art by imagining where locationally these works have the most impact, and seeking to bring empathetic awareness to this issue by transforming the stories of women into pieces of art. So this enables Vivas Nos Queremos and Ni Una Menos to sort of control the message, or to reclaim the narratives around victims of femicide in particular through art and through this deploying of art in the public space. And so this also connects to the idea of empathy as a form of knowledge creation and artistic creation. And so then a way organizations sort of operate, this is the example of the Women on Waves Foundation. The boat itself has become an art installation and an active working vessel that travels to different countries that don't have access to women's sexual health services and abortion, and where these things are outlawed. And so they provide medical consultation on this boat, in addition to this sort of being this traveling artistic process. And so again, the way these organizations are able to be active, provide services, as well as use art as a way of drawing their message. And then in turn, they empower other art activists who are engaging in art activism in relation to these feminist issues. And so then a couple artists that I look at are Tatiana Fasnalizade and Suzanne Lacey. Tatiana Fasnalizade engages with empathetic political engagement by sort of collecting the stories of women and using phrases in relation to women's experiences of harassment on the street to generate these phrases that accompany these large portraits of women. And again, the location of this is really important because she's placing it on the street in the places where this language is received by women or targeted women. So for example, phrases like "stop telling women to smile" and "you're not entitled to my space." And then Suzanne Lacey, this project in particular, these women are all wearing yellow scarves, and it's basically this large group of women that took up this very large block of houses, this positioning on the steps of a home. So there's this sort of conversation between public versus private space and where women's voices are located. And then it became just a dialogue of women sharing their experiences of harassment, of engagement with political conversations, of things of empowerment, of relationships. And really those dialogues and that conversation became the medium of the art. And so then finally, my work, Temptress, Villainous, Monster, Witch, was a way of me trying to explore within my own work this idea of storytelling as an act of resistance, and the notion that the way that we're able to tell and reclaim stories is really essential in sort of understanding who we are. So this Creative Works project tries to explore art activism through a series of large oil paintings, using art to promote women's rights by challenging the male dominant lens through which we view female figures in mythology, and visually reinterpret their stories through a current feminist perspective, reflecting on the importance of storytelling in building solidarity and addressing women's issues. And so this research and creative work reflects on the empathetic power of art activism, creating clarity by revealing truths about society that are not immediately visible, and identifying problems to call for transformation. And again, this idea, we first start to understand ourselves and our world through stories. And these stories we tell ourselves shape identity. So by challenging these stories in seeing the truth, ugliness, and hope that is embedded in them, I say that maybe we can create change. So I explore the narratives of powerful female mythical figures, specifically the stories of Medusa, as you saw in the last two slides. Here, Briseis and Daphne, and then the conversation around witches, as well as the figure of Cassandra, which you'll see in the next slide. And that these depictions of women have historically been shaped by men in power and twist their narratives through underlying misogynistic hierarchies. So sort of challenging that and then re-exploring these myths from a feminist perspective to illuminate instances of female suffering, strength, and power that are often overlooked. And so I hope through this work to try to create this activation of empathy by reimagining, reclaiming, and reinterpreting their stories. And so the way that in the process of creating these paintings and in the gallery space where I shared the work, women opened up to me about their experiences of harassment, self-image, empowerment, and pain in their own lives that they saw reflected in the paintings and reclaimed narratives. And so this created a space for intimacy, solidarity, and empathetic sharing that I was deeply moved by and that I hope to explore more deeply as I continue my own journey as an artist. But basically this idea that art activism helps illustrate the way that empathy is critical for political and artistic engagement. And I'm fascinated by how this can challenge the way we think about these two disciplines together and emphasize the importance of building knowledge based on transformative empathy. So thank you.
Wow, these were some really wonderful presentations and so related. It's so wonderful to see. I mean, I'm sure that the facilitators grouped these on purpose, but it's really wonderful to see the way that that they kind of naturally intersect. No, do you guys feel that, students? Yeah. I mean, the questions really emerge really naturally, again, because your projects really do intersect. And I urge you also to ask each other questions as well as we continue. So if I ask one that prompts a conversation, please let it continue amongst yourselves. But yeah, so the first thing that began to occur to me, you know, I knew Sienna's kind of work coming into this, and then to hear Noah and Luke also reference Greek philosophy in their presentations, and to know that Sienna had referenced that in her painting before hearing her actual presentation. So I started to hear this kind of Western canon as a bedrock, and then I began to hear Alyssa talking about, you know, recognizing market systems that result from kind of settler colonial ideologies that depend on a kind of, again, conventional canon. But then in each of your projects, I hear other kinds of thinkers who maybe are adding to that or added to that and are now a part of your understanding of canon. So how do you see these thinkers who are adding to that conventional canon, who are not necessarily, you know, Aristotle, Plato? How do you see those thinkers, whether it's Gibran or Du Bois or Baldwin or bell hooks, kind of changing the discourse around a pursuit of happiness and love and human responsibility to one another? How do these thinkers that are part of your research add to the kind of bedrock with which you began? And maybe that is not the dynamic. Maybe it's inverted. Maybe that you began with bell hooks and you got to Plato. You know, can you speak to that, anyone? Your relationship to Western canon and to thinkers who enriched the pursuit of happiness, love, and empathy.
I think one thing that's interesting about engaging in, you know, as you refer to it, Western canon, is that those are fundamentally what have shaped the power structures that we're operating in. And so understanding how power is embedded in those conversations becomes an important part of recognizing then how theorists and, you know, for me personally, how feminist theory tries to subvert and change or challenge the way that those structures and ideas have been embedded. And so considering Western canon becomes less so of creating the foundation for the work, but more that's the foundation for how we understand society, and then how do we subvert and challenge that, I think is sort of how I approached it within my own research process, that then the theory became based around sort of this feminist or intersectional perspective that focuses on those conversations of empathy and the importance of sort of challenging power, that sort of Western perspective is the basis of those power structures. So,
you know, in Luke, you were speaking about Gibran, and you know, as well as eros and other kinds of Greek words for love. And you know, Gibran's such an interesting person because he was actually a Christian, I believe, but Arab and influenced by Islam. And I think part of the reason why that book appeals to so many people is because of its kind of intersections in a kind of supra spirituality. Is there some relationship there to the notion of canon? He's coming from a kind of a bedrock of the religions of the book, but he's also influenced by Sufis. You know, what happens when you have all of these kind of intersecting ideas? Does it enrich again the conversation around love?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think just looking at it culturally today, like in India, what I hear from most Indian families is like, you don't really hear the phrase "I love you" between like parents and kids, at least from people I know. And like you just know it's there. It's not something that needs to be I don't know, expressed in the same way. And I don't fully understand the realm of Western canon, but I think specifically with like the prophet, who like he has such his life is just this interesting intersection between all these different studies. And I think in my research, I've been fascinated far more towards Eastern views of love, because in America and in more Western ideology, it's there's not as many words for it, for the types of love. And like Greek is like the easiest, most accessible, like, okay, here are the different types and it just makes sense. But you delve into like the spirituality of it, which is what Khalil Gibran does. And it's kind of this, it has a certain poetic understanding to it, because it doesn't always need to be expressed through words, and it doesn't always need to be expressed through anything other than the testament through action, I guess. And yeah, I don't know how to speak beyond that, but that's kind of my understanding. It adds a definite richness to it, especially coming from just my upbringing as a white American San Diego boy. You know, the whole realm of spiritual love is something so new to me. And yeah, even in Christianity, it's like God is love. Okay, what is then who is God within me? You know, and I think that's where Gibran kind of is able to show that through his writings and through his relationships and connections to the Sufis and Christianity and Islam and all that.
Well, one of the things that intersections bring, like enable, maybe is something that I think Alyssa was speaking to a little bit as well. This the moment you know that there is something other than what you've been brought up with, you know, Alyssa, you're talking about an educational system that then once you begin to think outside that box, then you understand that there are options. Right, so intersections don't necessarily mean that one is better than another or whatever, but they enable us to kind of think more expansively about the fact that there are other kinds of options. I guess I'm also thinking a little bit about I mean, and Alyssa, if you feel like speaking to that, you're welcome. I can always introduce more questions, but if you feel to speak to the idea of intersections or the canon as an expanded field, jump in.
Well, I was just gonna say the works that I've been drawn to, I mean, I'm just gonna be honest, I don't particularly like Plato or Aristotle because I think they're speaking from the heavens and I don't know where they're speaking from, type of a thing. I can't get on that level, probably because I've never been on that level. And I probably never been on that level because I don't presumably look like them. I don't have their experiences. So I think the writers that, besides I think the writers that I most have been interested into, and especially I went to actually the Dr. Floyd kept talking about James Baldwin. I didn't know who that was, and so I went to the library and I was like, okay, I'll find a James. I did any, mini, miny, mo type of a thing, and I found James Baldwin, and it said on the cover he was the angriest man in America, and I was like, ooh, I'm angry too. I guess we'll be angry together. And so he spoke from a place where he said he was frightened to death, which I don't specifically see. Maybe he does. I haven't read all of Plato's works or Aristotle's, except they're trying to find the good life, which that is good too, but not to criticize them too much. I don't see them saying directly what they're feeling. It's more of like let's talk about things from a safe place. And Baldwin, I don't come from a safe place. I don't think safe places even exist, but I don't come from there. So the Western canon, if I can critique it, is not something that looks like all of us. It's not that something that embeds, that embodies all of us. So I don't think that that's been a bedrock for me. But that's just my opinion.
Right. No, I think in your talk, you were talking more about kind of, you used the word hegemonic, kind of capitalist structures, and that was the kind of a canon that I was relying on to unite you with them. But that's a really interesting observation that the, you know, Socrates is not written from a personal story, and Baldwin is, whether it's a story that you share or not. I mean, you know, Noah, would you agree, given the way that you structured your symposium? The symposium that you structured is based on Plato's, and the idea there is that it does come from personal story. Is it abstracted personal story, or is it, you know, otherwise?
Is my symposium off of personal story?
Well, no, I mean, like, how do you feel about, as you bring in these 8 people? Is it important to bring in those 8 people because they have stories and therefore communicate a little bit more of these abstract ideas, the way maybe Alyssa's saying Baldwin does? Is that why one uses characters like that?
I created my characters to represent the different points of view. So I had the points of views first, and I knew I wanted to argue for them. I've been asking myself how to be happy throughout your entire life since I was 13. That's when I first started thinking about it. Just I refuse to get into a cycle of doing what I have to do and waking up every morning and dreading the day. I want to wake up excited for the day. And sometimes we have to do what we have to do, but then it becomes attitude. It's I get to, not I have to. But so I wanted to bring in these 8 characters. Originally, I was going to have characters from more diverse backgrounds. But like we were talking about with the, you know, the Western point of view, I didn't feel that I could represent super diverse characters super well in my writing because I grew up in a Western background. I wanted to stay within my range of characters to create, which was important to me. And then I was just going to say about the intersectionality, working with Luke on his project and learning about what he was talking about, that helped me structure my keystone speaker for my project. So I don't know if mine would have turned out the same if I had had 2 classes with Luke over the last year, learning about his project, talking about my project, talking about them in conjunction.
What do you think about this idea of the subject and the object that Alyssa brought up? There's this question of agency, right? Is everyone familiar with the idea of the subject and the object? The subject as the person with agency, the object as that upon whom, you know, acts are visited in a more passive framework. You know, she was talking about how students are positioned in power dynamics, and I'm wondering about the position of the people in your projects. Who in the matrix of your project is an agent and who's acted upon? you know, it's clear in Alyssa's questions around education that she's been concerned with the idea of students as passive objects. Maybe that's not clear. Alyssa, you can clarify. But who in a situation of love or happiness or societal responsibility, like where is the agency there? Who's the subject? Who's the object? Ideally and realistically, both.
I would say the agency, like the subject would be my last speaker, talking about how happiness comes from within and comes from personal choices, and that no matter your circumstances, you always you do have the choice of what mentality you're going to go into the situation with. And so then I would say a person can become the object if instead of trying to affect the world, they have the world affect them. Of course, that's very much an ideology, and it's not a practice. But I would say that's how I would represent it in my own work.
I mean, to me, it seems like in your project, everybody's, you know, happiness is the pursuit of happiness is the pursuit of agency, whether you're talking about money agency or surfing, living in the moment agency, right? Like, does that ring true?
Totally. Yeah, it's the choices. Well, so I'm a psychology minor, so I've done some thinking about, like, nature versus nurture, and just especially cognitive psychology and how that affects our lives. Like cognitive psychology, a lot of the principles in like cognitive psychological therapy is that you need to train your brain in order to get out of unhealthy thinking habits. And so basically all my characters have tried to train themselves into being happy, but given different, just different personalities and different backgrounds, they come to the same conclusion from a lot of different ways. And so I do agree with you that I think all my characters use agency.
This has been fascinating. Thank you, Dr. Karapetian, did I say that right? For your wonderful questions here. I find myself wondering, as I'm listening, empathy or some form of love, which I'd like to call empathy, seems to be in circulation across every project. Even if you're pushing against something that is detrimental to one's existence, that is a form of love, it seems to me. Speaking to Sienna there particularly, right? That you're attempting to create an environment in which people feel they're acknowledged, respected, that they have a place and a space in the world, that they can call their own with and among others. And I'm hearing that in everyone's work. So this question is actually for everyone. I find myself wondering, and I'm feeding off of Alyssa's work in a sense, what part of our educational journey or experience, particularly the early years, which we're told is kind of our most formative years, is centered in the very ideas of empathy and love, and kind of a care for each other that all of you, to my mind, are speaking about. So in other words, how are we educated into the very things you're seeking now? Does that make sense?
That was really beautifully said. I love that idea of, thinking about where we start to form empathy and how our interactions with others sort of generate empathy. So I guess for me, that fundamental answer is looking at, both creativity as a way of helping to generate empathy, especially like when you think about creativity in schools and when you're asked to read a story, or when you're asked to engage in an art project, or you're asked to do these sort of things that are engaging with human experience or have a conversation, empathy can kind of become the precursor for creativity in general. And there's like lots of research into the kind of the psychology of that too. But then empathy, I think, is generated largely from just having those experiences and building relationships with people through school. So it becomes like, if we think about the formation of empathy, it's so much about those interpersonal interactions and how you're able to like listen and understand different perspectives. And so I think the more from a young age you're also exposed to different ideas and perspectives, there's a form of empathy building that takes place within education, or a capacity for that at least. So I think there being an openness for creativity and conversation becomes an essential part of that idea of forming empathy, and then sort of connecting that to the idea of love that we talk about. I think that empathy has the capacity to lead to compassion and then to love, but empathy kind of has to become a foundation for that, for understanding where someone's coming from in order to better love them, I think, personally.
Thank you. Wow. Wonderful answer. Of course, art and such things are typically the first thing we want to get rid of in educational arenas, which I think is quite telling about us culture.
And honestly, that idea of us getting rid of those art processes, I think that also connects a lot to like what Alyssa's talking about, of this sort of divorcing education from this conversation about, or divorcing education from human experience in a lot of ways, that becomes this sort of rigid structure that I think is really powerful in sort of the research you've done, Alyssa, as well.
And how do you continue that interaction, even if it were ideally to begin in early childhood education? You guys are graduating in anytime soon, and you know, how do you take the artist, the farmer, the educator, the investment banker, the spiritual you know, searcher, seeker? How do you get them all in the same room? Oh, I think John has a question, but I guess this is my tail end of response to Professor Floyd's. How do you continue that beyond education? How do you keep education going outside of the institution, as it were? You guys have any ideas for how you're going to try to do that?
Well, whether we see it or not, education and its pedagogies and the way in which we understand ourselves through power dynamics of you know, adhering to a boss or adhering to a teacher, that's we're already doing that. You know what I mean? We've already taken the model of education and put it in the workplace. We put it in, you know, the religious place. We put it in any type of place you want to call a place. And from that understanding, it seems like it would be very simple to just restructure, even though I'm laughing because it's going to take a lot, to restructure the way in which we educate so that it does the same thing about perpetuating capitalism to each of these places, to perpetuate something like love, or something like the ability to see ourselves in the shoes of another person who maybe is, you know, who doesn't have enough money to eat. And so then we share our food with them, or doesn't have, you know, warm clothes. So then we maybe give them our jacket. So then we embody those things. And in that understanding, it doesn't take much. It takes the willingness or the responsibility for one another to do those things. But instead, I'm thinking of this interview of Tupac, where he says, you know, he says, this is mine, and he's like, back up. And he does that he's like, so what we do is we take what's ours and we say, get away. And rather, I'm trying to say, you know, we could do it even in pre-K, where we say we share our toys, or we share, you know, the jungle gym, or we share you know, whatever. I mean, I could think back, but we could share all those things, you know what I mean? Rather than saying, that's mine, that's yours, and let's separate, or let's separate the boys from the girls, or, you know, we could even go into the intersectionality of gender, race, and whatnot like that with that as well.
And for my, excuse me, for my project, I think it's interesting because sometimes I feel like it takes like a certain level of, it seems to like that you have to have privilege in order to have like the time and accessibility to think about this stuff. And I don't know, everyone's going to experience oppressive systems and or be part of it, or just they're going to experience happiness and joy and love, and they're going to want that. And I don't know, these are all things that are very much affecting all of us, but to kind of put forward this thought that we need to at least like emphasize love in our life, and that can be the catalyst for more empathy and for kind of looking more into kind of structures of oppression and kind of how we can put that into art. You know, maybe it takes individual restructuring in that it's okay to allow a person to full-fledged just focus on that instead of like having to worry about other stuff. But I mean, that takes I don't really know where I'm going with that. It's just like that's the thing that's emanating in my mind. It's like, well, it sucks sometimes because I've met people who are like, I don't have time to think about happiness or love. Like, I got to get work done. And it's like, I think maybe that's just me highlighting the reality that the conversations we're having can be harder to put into place when, you know, there's so much stress and frustration. And I think quarantine is a really cool time for that, because so many professors and so many teachers of my nieces and nephews have been able to be more empathetic towards us. And I'm experiencing that more than ever in my education system, like from professors. There's a lot of empathy, and we have a lot of time for self-exploration, just being alone and seeing like how joy and love and oppressive systems are put into place. And I know that makes me, I'm rambling a bit, but that makes me think of how some people are going from maybe their school institution to more harmful areas where there could be those oppressive systems more emphasized in their home system, rather than somewhere else. So there's an opportunity for either it's harder to get it, or maybe it's more accessible. So I don't know, just two interesting things.
And first, I want to thank you all very much. Really wonderful research topics, and you guys have sort of pursued some really important stuff, you know, from happiness to love to education to anger to empathy, and you've started sort of turning a lot of stones to explore what all that stuff is, what it means for us both culturally, individually, and historically, and I congratulate you on that. Noah's topic interested me because, well, on a very personal level, and forgive me if I ramble for just a half a minute, it reminded me, like a bit more than half a century ago, my family immigrated to this country, and I was an utterly confused and very quiet little Arab child that felt like I was dropped in a different planet in Brooklyn, New York. And as I began to sort of learn first the language, but then the culture, I was really struck by this thing that I was taught in class. I think it was like 8th grade, 9th grade, I can't remember when, you know, and it was like this life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I did a lot of head scratching. The pursuit of, I got excited by the word, the pursuit of happiness. You know, when I was a kid growing up in the Arab world, nobody talked about happiness. You know, they talked a lot about misery, but there was no discussion of happiness. But it was utterly confusing what happiness meant. But it was even more confusing with the word that came before it, the pursuit of happiness, that it's something that we have to chase. It's something outside, right? And, you know, growing up in America, I chased it. I chased happiness, right? So as a teenager, you chase the obvious things, you know, of the great Western values of, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll as a way to achieve happiness. But it took me a while to figure out what Noah has figured out, which is it's an internal thing. And ever since, I've been really angry at the word happiness, because a lot of people waste their whole lives pursuing happiness, right? So I've often wanted to erase that word from our language, from this language. And I would ask Noah, if we could erase that, what word would you suggest that we substitute for happiness?
I would say satisfaction. You should be, satisfied where you're at, what you're doing, whatever's going on. I think satisfaction is really the key. Like, I don't know, when I get like really down, I think about, well, what am I satisfied with? What do I have going for me? What do I have here, there? But like you were saying, trying to go out and find happiness. A big part of how I got into this is I really I want to be an actor. But growing up, one of my favorite actors was Chris Farley, and he committed suicide by drugs. Another one of my favorite actors was Robin Williams, and he committed suicide by drugs. So these guys that were so funny and so talented weren't happy. They had what I thought was it, but they weren't happy. They weren't satisfied with where they were at. They didn't have it. And yeah, so like you, I realized, well, it's not going to come from whatever you think it is. It's got to come from inside. You got to first know yourself, and then accept yourself and love yourself. And then through that, you can be satisfied with yourself. And then I think you could find happiness. I hope I answered your question well. I'm not so sure I did, but I really like that question. Thank you for asking.
I'd like to suggest that we figure out a different world and kind of maybe phase out the word happiness from our vocabulary, because it's a distraction to what we're trying to say or trying to suggest with that word. It becomes kind of like this thing that gets us to reflect outside, right? And especially in a very materialistic culture where the concept of happiness is constantly monetized to create desire, right? So this will make you happy, and this will make you happy, and this will make you happy. And I don't know, I just want us to think about not you. I remember some years ago, I think I really scared the crap out of my preceptees when we were talking about what their goals were. And one student very honestly said, I want to pursue happiness. And I responded by saying, happiness is highly overrated. Let's look at something else. And I think that student wanted to run away from me. But I think we need to think about that word and what it means and how it's used, and most often how it's misused, and that it could possibly create the exact opposite of what we mean by it.
I said, well, as part of what's tricky about that phrase, pursuit of happiness, the suggestion that it's a place at which one arrives and stays, I mean, that's also what's tricky about the word satisfied. I think the word happy comes from the word for good luck, linguistically. And I think that if we think about, I mean, you guys tell me, Alyssa, Sienna, Luke, what do you think about the idea of love or happiness as not places where you arrive and stay, but as things that kind of come in and out of your experience, and that you do maybe pursue, but not have expectations of in terms of permanence and longevity? I mean, what other activities is life constituted but the pursuit of moments of XYZ, whatever those XYZ are? I mean, are you always going to be, is it possible to be in a sustained state of love constantly? I mean, that sounds like a trip. I don't know. It's it's hard.
I'd like to, based on Sienna's presentation, suggest that we substitute the word empathy for happiness. If that
What's really interesting about both your points, though, is that you know, I'm not religious at all, but I grew up in a very Hindu house, so I know that happiness doesn't exist because of casteism and reincarnation, and the search for it is futile because you don't know what kind of, I'm just telling you what the cultural religious worldview is. The pursuit of it is also futile because you don't know if you'll come back as a cockroach or hummingbird. So I think what's really interesting about what both of you are asking, though, is, you know, is it happiness that's kind of the burden of needing it, something that we think is so essential to being human, but also just the idea that we have to keep searching for it. So I always thought I wanted this, but I have to keep pursuing it. So now I have to find something else that I need to make me happy. So I love what both of you are saying, which is that the pursuit of a certain place or thing is grueling, but also the word itself, because it's has no meaning unless there's self-reflection and empathy, becomes actually meaningless, right? And I actually take back my point. I think the only place where I learned to be what Carlton was asking is in my art classes, actually. There was in high school, no competition. We had to critique each other only to give positive feedback. Every other class was full of competition. So to the art professors here, maybe I should have gone into art, but I didn't. But that was the only place where I learned to be a part of a community. Yeah.
I'm reflecting on John and Farah's questions and responses, and I've always thought of the pursuit of happiness, or any pursuit, if you will, that we tend to focus on that latter part, the term happiness, and then we tend to give short shrift to the first term, which is pursuit. And particularly within this kind of current culture that we have, pursuit for me takes on a greater level of difficulty because, and I'm thinking, my best example of this is if you've ever been to the dog track, you know, they have these dogs and they put them in these little cages and then they let them go and they chase this little friggin' mechanical rabbit around the track. Well, the point is not to catch it. They can't. The point is to chase it, if that makes sense. And I see a lot of that as a part of our culture. We're chasing many things that are actually not designed to be caught. So I just want to throw that into the picture and see what other people, you know, think. By the way,
Right,
this
it's not an acquisitive paradigm, right? I mean, it's not supposed to be an acquisitive paradigm. Happiness, usually, I don't know, I identify it with a feeling that I haven't actually sought it, it arrives, right? That's what I think where the word blessing comes from, right? Like you feel like this relief that you've actually stepped into the way of happiness as it went by you. Oh my God, it was there. I got it for a second, right? And then it's gone. And then, you know, you go about your day and cut somebody off in traffic and just.
I'm reading the book to find the words, but that's okay. Sadhguru, who is a yogi, like mystic in India, he has talked about kind of this joy and love in what I think is an interesting way, and that joy is much more like, or happiness, I guess. I think there's an interesting conversation that could be just in between those two words, but it's more like a flower that happens. So sometimes people say like just try laughing, try smiling. That'll make you feel better. Like there's like psychologists who say like, yeah, you do that and you get endorphins and whatnot. But kind of where he's going with that is like, you have to sometimes work through, and he's a yogi, so that pretense that there's this, in yoga, there's this idea of oneness and kind of finding a balance between mind, body, spirit, energy. So he says you have to really go through a lot of shit and manure in order to tend to the ground and the earth for a flower to become its beautiful, most fragrant self. This idea that if you try just spraying a fragrance on you or putting a plastic flower in your yard, you're not going to really be a happy, joyful person. And he starts saying stuff like if you don't have joy in your life, sometimes the most pleasurable activities can become burdensome and annoying and just hard. So it's this idea of like the joy and the happiness will come and go. Don't pursue that as much, but allow yourself to work through the manure and to tend to the soil, to care for the roots of the plant in order for you to kind of blossom into a joyful and loving human being. And I think another aspect of love specifically is that a lot of love is about our commitment, our word, our integrity, but of who we are as a person. If we kind of say that we're going to do something or make a commitment to another person, that's far more of a choice in a relationship than it is of the feelings behind it. So I think that we can often, sometimes that itself could be viewed as the tending to the soil. Your word is to care for someone, and you do it when you don't like them, when you are frustrated, when life is not working out. And it's possible that joy can kind of emanate through that experience. Of course, there's other situations where like you may be abused, and that's not something that is worth it. That's not the shit that you want to go through. That's not the type of soil, that you're trying to tend to. It's more the I don't know, other stuff. And that's kind of I think that's the hard part, and is finding to what extent is the hard stuff that we go through, and to what extent do we go through the minutia of things in order to feel joy, rather than just going out and having it right there from a drug or from a drink or from a person. I have another question just for Sienna. Your project really fascinates me, both Alyssa and Sienna, because I haven't worked with you guys, but I've worked with myself and Noah so much that I've gotten to ask all these questions. But Sienna, I think art is interesting because the role of empathy in it, and I don't know if empathy is the emphasis of your project, but maybe you can kind of enlighten me on that. But I kind of see that in art, you have to like have a certain empathy in order to put out your art into the world, or like you have to really experience yourself fully sometimes to put out art in the world. I don't know if that's true. But also art kind of is a catalyst or what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of draws out that experience of people too, just by looking at it or experiencing it or listening to it, whatever sense of that. What's your understanding of with your work and your study? How does that kind of cycle work where you're putting out your emotions and your empathy into art, and then art is giving that back to you at the same time to other people?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of cyclical or triangular relationship between like viewer, artist, and the art itself, I think is enriched by that framework of empathy. And I mean, exactly what you were saying about art being sort of a catalyst for empathy and or can be a catalyst for empathy, but then also requires an element of empathy from the artist and the viewer to engage with the work. And so I think within my own process, so much of it is thinking about not only how will the work be perceived, but more so what emotion do I, or like, how do I want the viewer to feel? Or how can I create a space for a conversation where the viewers can engage empathetically both with the stories and the conversations happening in the space, but then also reflect on their own experiences. And so, for me personally, the most enriching part of kind of having the culmination of the work and having the work displayed, but also within the process of creating the work was engaging in these dialogues with people, talking and sharing, primarily women sharing their own experiences of strength, of hope, of love, of pain, that these pieces sort of connected for them on that level, and sort of facilitated that conversation. So I think there's something really strong in that ability to create an empathetic and compassionate space through art. And I think that then becomes, you know, connecting that to the political science aspect of art activism, a really fundamental and foundational way for how we can better engage with the world. This, you know, pursuing happiness, pursuing love, pursuing empathy, but finding a way to challenge and talk about power structures and experience in a way that is empathetic and is caring, and sort of integrating that into the way that we construct knowledge, I think is foundational.
I just want you all to know that this is the longest we have stayed in all the sessions. And it's probably because of, it's not probably because, very likely because these are topics that are very close to the things we all care about. And considering the fact that professor and student alike are still trying to figure out new ways to think about these things, it shows you how exactly the importance of your research, right? You are the new generation of scholars, and what you're doing is critiquing knowledge production. So thank you very much for thinking of yourself as knowledge producers, right? So we will look out for you all. Please find that new language, new narratives for us to kind of be guided by. And thank you so much to Professor Karpetian for facilitating those excellent questions, and to all the mentors and friends who've also attended this session. Thank you all so much. What best way to end this week? Love, empathy, and flowers and laughter. I think I got them all. Thank you all so much.